A plastic doll cut off at the waist, wearing a big crocheted dress, sat on the back of the toilet. Underneath her skirt, a spare roll of Andrex. Your nan had one, half the street had one, and nobody ever questioned why. That's just one of 25 items in this video that made no sense but were in all of our homes. You might have forgotten about half of them, but the second I mention them, they'll come straight back. Breville brought out their toasted sandwich maker in 1974, and it took over British kitchens almost overnight. You'd butter 2 slices, put some cheese in the middle, close the lid, and 4 minutes later the filling was hot enough to take the roof of your mouth off. You'd bite in and spend the next 10 seconds breathing through it while everyone else carried on eating. The non-stick stopped working after about 3 goes. After that, you were scraping melted cheese off with a butter knife. People tried all sorts in there. Beans if they were feeling brave, chocolate spread if nobody was watching. A 2005 survey found nearly half of British adults still had one in a cupboard somewhere, unused. It had come out once a year for old time's sake and go straight back where it came from. The beaded door curtain was another kitchen favourite. Strings of wooden or plastic beads hanging from the frame. The idea came from places like Spain and Italy, where they kept flies out in the summer heat. In a terraced house in the middle of England in November, they didn't keep anything out. They just made noise, a big racket every time someone walked through. You couldn't sneak anywhere. Kids loved them. They'd walk through over and over just for the sound. Within a few weeks, half the strings had tangled together and stayed that way until there were just a few beads hanging off one side that nobody ever took down. If your house was built or done up in the 60s or 70s, there's a good chance it had a serving hatch, a hole cut in the wall between the kitchen and the dining room with a little sliding panel on it. You could pass plates through without walking all the way round. It sounded clever, but it didn't really work. You could only fit 1 plate through at a time, so everyone still had to get up and queue. All the steam and cooking smells came straight through the gap anyway, and whoever was in the kitchen could hear everything being said at the table, so they'd end up shouting back through the hole. The kids used it for passing notes, toys, and on at least one occasion, the cat. Now, some of these items were just a bit daft, but the twin-tub washing machine was genuinely hard work. 2 tubs sitting side by side, one for washing, one for spinning. You filled the wash tub yourself, added the powder, waited for it to finish, and then lifted each soaking wet item out with a pair of wooden tongs and moved it across into the spinner. The whole machine shook during the spin cycle, properly shook, enough to send it across the kitchen floor if you weren't holding on. You had to keep one eye on the drain hose the whole time in case it came loose and flooded the lino. Millions of homes ran one of these every Monday because that was wash day. The fondue set was a wedding present favourite in the 1970s. A ceramic pot with a little spirit burner underneath and a set of long forks. And the idea was you'd all sit round dipping bread into melted cheese like you were in the Swiss Alps. The burner was a nightmare to get going. The cheese either stayed hard or turned to rubber, and every single time someone's bread would fall off the fork and sink, and nobody ever knew what you were supposed to do when that happened. Most fondue sets came out once, made a mess, and went straight back in the box. Every charity shop in the country still has a stack of them. Now let's talk about bathrooms, because the 1970s had very strong opinions about bathrooms. The avocado suite, that green sink, toilet and bath all matching, all in that very specific shade of green that most people in Britain had never seen on an actual avocado. In the early 70s, it was the thing to have. You'd pair it with brown carpet on the floor and some gold-coloured towels, and you thought you'd really done something. But by the 90s, estate agents were telling people to rip them out before viewings. Funny thing is, original suites are going for good money at salvage yards now. People want them back. Stepping out of the bath onto bare lino in January was miserable, so carpet felt like the answer. The problem was obvious to everyone except the people fitting it. The area around the base of the toilet stayed permanently damp. You couldn't see what was growing underneath, but after a while you could smell it. Shake and vac helped for about 10 minutes. Tiles were right there the whole time, but no, we went with carpet. The Goblin Teasmade, an alarm clock with a built-in kettle and teapot that sat on your bedside table. When the alarm went off, it boiled the water, filled the pot, and your tea was ready before you'd opened your eyes. That was the idea. What actually happened was it hissed and gurgled and spat steam across the bed while you tried to sleep through it. The tea sat in the pot too long and went bitter. The ceiling above got damp. By the 1980s, it had become one of those prizes on Bullseye that nobody really wanted to win. But at the time, they were in bedrooms all over the country. Back to the floors for this one. That deep, thick shag pile carpet in colours like burnt orange, dark brown, olive green, and a sort of rusty red. It went into living rooms all through the late 60s and 70s. Walking across it barefoot was genuinely soft and warm, and that was about where the good news ended. Anything you dropped disappeared. Coins, pen lids, earrings, bits of food, swallowed up. The vacuum barely made a dent unless you had something powerful, and even then the pile just folded over and hid whatever was underneath. When people finally pulled it up in the 80s, they found years' worth of lost things buried in there. If the carpet was holding on to everything, the furniture was doing the opposite. The three-piece suite in the 1970s was almost always covered in Draylon, that velvet-like fabric in brown or burnt orange or mustard. It looked smart when it was new, but it had a hidden talent. Static. You'd get up off the sofa and your hair would stand on end. Touch a door handle and you'd get a shock. If you had a cat, the fur stuck to it like it was magnetic. And then there were the arm covers, little rectangles of fabric draped over each armrest to stop them wearing out. They were never quite big enough, and they spent their whole life sliding off. Every time someone sat down, especially a child, they ended up on the floor. Someone picked them up, put them back, and the whole thing started again 5 minutes later. Storage heaters were big, heavy boxes bolted to the wall. They charged up overnight using cheap electricity and were supposed to release that heat slowly through the day. By breakfast, the room was boiling. By late afternoon, when it was actually getting cold, they'd given up completely. They weighed a ton. Once they were on the wall, they weren't going anywhere. The coal effect electric fire was meant to look like a real fireplace. Fake logs made of painted clay and a little motor inside that spun a piece of shiny foil behind a bulb to make it look like glowing coals. From across the room, in low light, you could almost convince yourself. Get any closer and you could see the foil going round and hear the motor. If the motor got stuck, you were just staring at an orange bulb in a plastic box with no warmth coming off it. Some had a mode where you could turn the heat off and just have the fake glow, which was about as useful as a picture of a bonfire. If you've ever rented a house or lived in a council property, you know this one. Wood chip wallpaper. Small pieces of wood pressed into thick paper, stuck to every wall in the place. It was cheap and it covered up everything. Cracks, damp patches, old wallpaper, the lot. It did its job for years. The problem came the day you tried to take it off. It gripped onto the plaster like nothing you've ever seen. You'd steam it, soak it, scrape it, and still end up pulling off tiny pieces while the rest of it stayed exactly where it was. And then you'd find another layer underneath. The lava lamp, a glass tube with coloured wax and liquid heated from below. The wax would warm up, rise in slow blobs, cool down, and sink again. It didn't do anything useful, but you could sit and watch it for ages. The only rule was, don't shake it, because someone always did. And once you shook it, the wax broke into 100 little bits that never properly came back together. The telephone table was a little piece of furniture in the hallway, half seat and half shelf, right next to the phone, which was bolted to the wall on a cord that barely stretched a foot. The shelf held the phone book, the yellow pages, and the Thomson Local. When the phone rang, you'd sit yourself down in the coldest, draftiest part of the house and try to have a conversation while everyone walked past you on the way to the kitchen, the stairs, and back again. When cordless phones came along, it lost its purpose overnight. Most ended up in the garage holding tins of paint. If the telephone table was about making do, the hostess trolley was about showing off. A heated trolley on wheels, meant for dinner parties. The veg went grey. The gravy got a thick skin on top. The roast potatoes lost any crispness they ever had, and the trolley had a wobble that made the whole trip from kitchen to dining room feel like a risk. Look up in any British house built or decorated between the mid-1960s and the 1980s, and you'll probably see it. Artex. That textured coating on the ceiling, swirled into patterns by someone with a comb or a brush, or looking back, probably just a sponge on the end of a stick. It was cheap, it was quick, and it covered up rough plasterwork. It went on millions of ceilings. But Artex put on before about 1984 sometimes had a small amount of white asbestos in it, and anyone who's tried to renovate one of those ceilings since found that out the hard way. Every door in the house had a draft excluder, a long stuffed tube of fabric laid along the bottom to keep the cold air out. Some were plain, some were knitted, and for reasons nobody has ever been able to explain, a huge number of them were shaped like dash hounds or snakes. Your nan probably made hers out of old tights stuffed with newspaper. They never stayed in place. Every time you opened the door, the excluder got shoved across the floor and bunched up against the wall. You'd put it back, open the door again. Same thing. They helped a bit with the draft, but the amount of time spent pushing them back into position probably cancelled out any warmth they saved. Christmas Day, and Dad's in the dining room trying to carve the turkey, but he's not using a normal knife. He's got the electric carving knife out, if he can find it. 2 vibrating blades inside a plastic handle that made a loud buzzing noise the second you turned it on. You couldn't hear a word anyone was saying. It flicked bits of fat and juice across the tablecloth, and the turkey came out looking more torn than carved. Cleaning it meant taking the blades apart and picking out bits of meat with a skewer, used once a year and forgotten about until the next Christmas. Every living room had a magazine rack, usually wire or wicker, tucked beside the armchair. Every single one started tidy and ended up the same way. Within a couple of weeks, it was stuffed with the Radio Times, Woman's Own, a Reader's Digest, a couple of Sunday supplements, a Littlewoods catalogue, and a local paper from months ago that someone swore they were going to read. The thing leaned sideways under the weight. The magazines at the bottom got damp and stuck together. Then there was the Soda Stream. Get busy with the fizzy. You remember the advert. The machine sat on the kitchen worktop, and the idea was you'd carbonate your own tap water, add a bit of flavoured syrup, and make your own fizzy drinks at home. Sounds great. The problem was the taste. The cola syrup tasted nothing like actual Coca-Cola, not even close. The orange was odd. The dandelion and burdock was something else entirely. The gas bottle always ran out at the worst moment, usually when you had people round. Kids would hold the button down too long, and the whole thing would fizz over across the worktop. Every family went mad for it in the first few weeks, and then it quietly ended up at the back of the shelf. There was always a drinks cabinet somewhere in the house, usually in the corner of the living room, a proper piece of furniture with a lock and a little key that everyone already knew where it was. You'd open it up, and inside there'd be a mirror, a few glasses, and the same bottles that had been there for years: Cinzano, Dubonnet, Harvey's Bristol Cream, Advocat, and somewhere near the back a bottle of Cherry B that hadn't moved since about 1974. It came out at Christmas and when someone important visited. Some had a little light inside that came on when you opened it, which made the whole thing look like a tiny off-license had set up in your living room. Nobody ever bought a new bottle for it. They were just always there. If you ever had people round for dinner, you'll remember the table. Not just the food, but the ceremony around it. Everything had to be out before anyone arrived. The matching napkins folded into their rings, the bread basket with its cloth lining, placemats with a cockerel or a cottage on the front pressed onto cork backing, salt and pepper in a set, the butter dish with its glass lid. It was like setting a stage for a performance that lasted about 40 minutes and ended with someone wiping down the placemats with a damp cloth. The bread in the basket went cold after about 4 minutes. The napkin rings came out of a drawer that only opened for guests, and the whole thing got packed away and put back exactly where it was until the next time. In millions of homes across Britain, the electricity ran on coins, a prepayment meter tucked away under the stairs, fed with 50p pieces. When the money ran out, everything went off. Lights, heating, telly, all at once. Then everyone started looking. Kitchen drawer, coat pockets, down the back of the sofa, the biscuit tin. You needed a 50p and you needed it right then. Most families kept a jar of coins somewhere near the meter for exactly this. And feeding that coin into the slot in the dark, because the power was already gone, was something a whole generation grew up doing. You'd hear the click, the lights would come back on, and that was that. Until the next time.